Hello, my name is Nadia Saeed. I'm a wife, mom, and CEO of Bank Al-Ittihad. Since its inception, Bank Al-Ittihad has been a merit-based, equal opportunity company that's proud to have talented and ambitious women compose 45% of its staff. Our gender-inclusive policies, including equal pay for equal work, zero tolerance for discrimination, and equal benefits have made us the employer of choice for women in Jordan, with over 50% of monthly job applications received being from female job seekers. Gender equality and championing women are deeply ingrained in our DNA, and we're inspired and shaped by the women we work with every day. We believe in financial freedom and security for all and have curated a suite of financial and non-financial solutions under the name of Shuruq that has been enabling women to achieve that. Being part of Women's Empowerment Principles further strengthened our efforts in increasing female economic participation and promoting gender equality in the workplace, marketplace, and community. It helped us gain insights from UN partners and experts on how to accelerate further progress on gender equality and allowed us to share our gender equality practices. Our aim is to deepen implementation of the Women's Empowerment Principles and strengthen their contribution to Sustainable Development Goal 5.5, which calls for equal women representation, participation, and leadership in business globally. This has become even more important today as our world faces multiple emergencies, from a global pandemic to the climate crisis and the impact those emergencies have had on women and girls. This can only happen if we choose to break barriers and disrupt biases by making sure we are adding a gender lens to every step of the career ladder, from hiring to training to succession planning and promoting, ensuring equal pay for equal work and closing the gender pay gap, implementing flexible and family-friendly workplace policies, raising awareness for gender equality and the business case behind it, fostering a culture where discrimination and bias are not tolerated, setting targets for women's representation in key decision-making positions from entry level to board level, measuring and reporting on internal gender targets that monitor progress and flag problem areas. This is a matter of great importance to us at Bank Al-Ittihad, and for me personally, and as an organization, we hold ourselves accountable at every level, starting at the very top, and are determined to making meaningful progress on all our gender KPIs in the year ahead. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this regional spotlight discussion, taking a deep dive into the region's significant improvements in its commitment to the Women's Empowerment Principles, also known as the WEPs. Why am I saying significant improvements? A couple of years ago, there were no signatory of the WEPs in our region. And as of today, we have around 350 companies that have signed the principles. That's a tremendous, dramatic jump. I'm Suzanne Michael Elthagen, Regional Director for UN Women, Arab States, and I'm more than excited to welcome with me two outstanding trailblazers of women's economic empowerment and discuss the data evidencing the great value of women's representation and leadership in business. We will also have an honest and frank discussion around the remaining gaps and speak about the needed actions to further advance this agenda. I'm honored to welcome with us today Lamis Muhtasib and Carl Tashidjan, two accomplished champions of gender equality in the Arab States region. Lamis is the HR Director, Purpose, Culture and Inclusion Lead, Middle East at Deloitte. And her HR career spans over 20 years, during which she has worked across various industries. After spending 9 years leading HR with the financial advisory business, she went on to assume a specialist role leading purpose, culture, and inclusion for the Middle East and Cyprus. Lamis leverages the impact HR can have in driving positive and sustainable change, which is evident through her contribution to the D&I agenda organizational culture. Carl is the general manager of MetLife Lebanon, and Carl has 20 years of experience in the region and has held different roles within MetLife and moved to Lebanon in 2018, where he, in his role of general manager, tirelessly advocates for self-care and a healthy and enabling environment, work environment, that is, helping others to reach their full potential. I thank you for making yourself available today, and I'm excited for our conversation, and it revolves around 4 main areas. 1, companies' incentives to become signatories of the Women's Empowerment Principle. 2, short-term and long-term results of the WEP's gender analysis tool. 3, WEP's added value in the development of organization-wide gender quality strategies. And last, but definitely not least, the private sector's role in mitigating the negative effects of crises, including, of course, COVID-19. Because while we see the need for significant improvements in the area of women's political participation, the need for more women in leadership positions is also seen in the private sector. A study by Credit Suisse showed that companies where women made up at least 15% of senior management, these companies were 50% more profitable than those with fewer than 10% of senior managers being female. So unleashing the untapped potential of women in leadership positions and reaching that 5 to 15% increase that is attributed by evidence to women's representation in higher positions within the company's leadership. So in addition, we do see increasing evidence around the correlation between companies with female board members and these companies being more climate friendly. And that, my dear friends, is of critical importance, particularly in our region, because of the prediction of the increase of 4 degrees Celsius already by 2050 in the Middle East. So despite these clear arguments and strong evidence, as of 2019, only 13% of CEOs in the Arab region are women. And the lack of visible female leaders fuels stereotypes depicting women as observers, not as leaders. So we need to tackle these existing limitations, while of course at the same time invest in talented young women for future leader roles. And again, the loss here is evidently not only for women, but also for companies as a whole and for national economies. We have estimates around that this region, the Arab states region, is actually on a yearly basis losing a potential of $575 billion because of the unequal proportion of women in employment overall. So amongst our toolbox are the Women's Empowerment Principles, and which UN Women is spearheading. So these are 7 principles for companies to sign. They're all rooted in the business case for corporate action to promote gender equality and women's empowerment. All companies, private, public, state-owned and cooperatives, and of any size and any industry, established under national law, industry associations and chambers of commerce committed to advancing gender equality and women's empowerment in the workplace, marketplace, and community are invited to join the WEPs. In the Arab states region, as I previously alluded to, we are pleased to have around 350 companies as signatories of the WEPs, and the number grows on a daily basis. But signing the WEPs is a first step. Of course, then what we encourage is companies to do its first diagnosis. For example, looking at proportion of women in their workforce, or looking at proportion of women as managers and in their boards. And finally, addressing the challenges they see through a roadmap that is easily monitored. And of course, UN Women, with its unique expertise, will support any company in each step of the way, if and when necessary. So today we have the great opportunity to hear firsthand experiences from 2 genuine business experts. In this regard, I'm also very much looking forward to the forthcoming UN Women IFC and UN Global Compact report titled Bridging the Gap in the Arab States, Emerging Private Sector Response and Recovery Measures for Gender Equality amid COVID-19, which is expected to be published in April 2022 as a regional companion to the global publication of 2020. And this upcoming report showcases examples of good practices from a growing number of companies and organizations in the Arab states that are taking gender responsive action to ensure economic inclusion and social well-being of employees, customers, and suppliers, as well, of course, as local communities. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let me now turn to my two colleagues joining us in today's conversation. Dear Lamis and dear Carl, your company has joined a pool of more than 6,500 business leaders across the world that has committed to gender equality, leveraging women's empowerment principles. Now, from your perspective, what do you think convinced your respective leadership to join this global initiative? And what do you think can be done to encourage other companies from the region to take specific actions to advance their gender equality commitment? Lamis, why don't we start with you?
Oh, happy to. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the introduction, Susan, also. So perhaps I can just start with why we think perhaps leadership signed up. I think the first thing that we have to do is look at kind of really what it is and what it does, and what it's aiming to do. And the consideration really is, how does that align with what the business is trying to do? And does it really reflect the true core values of what the business agenda is around the gender agenda, as we can say. And I think, it's quite clear that the principles of the work really align with our business focus, but also not just the intention, but also the work that we're doing. So, if those principles and what it is and what it's trying to achieve are really aligned with our global initiatives, not just the local market, but really globally what we continue to strive to build on and to sustain and achieve. I think that there is great alignment there, and there are some real shared priorities and values and actions and so on that are encouraged. And with that commitment has to come action. It has to go hand in hand. And that action, leads to a lot of work where we create platforms that support the growth of women in the business, whether it's, a mentoring program and a sponsorship program, and just really building those pathways for women to be represented at the more senior levels. I think you touched on something earlier around the representation of women in the private sector, and I think there is a real ambition for a female talent pool out there, but we all know this. We still don't have that representation at the leadership level. So there is definitely the need to reflect through the efforts that we're making and the results that we're striving for, to really reflect our society, our clients, our community, and that's the business case for it. We have to be able to reflect what is, what's important to the community that we're working in. And so it's, and I think those values really align.
Thank you so much, Lamis. And Carl, what about your company then? What was the incentive, and what do you think can incentivize other companies to join the WEPs?
Thanks, Suzanne, for the question. But before I answer the question, I wanted to take this opportunity and wish all women around the world happy belated Women's Day. I strongly believe that achieving equality is possible, but it takes all of us. It takes the women who are fighting for this every day, and it takes us men who are allies and who are willing to make sure women have a chance to be heard. It is the work we do the other 364 days that will ultimately get us equal. Second of all, I'm really honored to be part of the Target Gender Equality Live event and this panel with Lamis and being moderated by you, Suzanne. So thank you very much. Going to your question, in March 2020, MetLife globally became a signatory of the UN Women's Empowerment Principles. MetLife leadership team is highly committed to advance DEI as we aspire to become a leading company in this area. For MetLife, DEI is a sustainability imperative linked to our strategy, our success principles, and our organizational performance. Signing the Women's Empowerment Principle with the UN was a huge leap forward as it aligned with our DEI goals to advance women and accelerate gender equity in the organization. Adopting the DEI culture, as we all know, is a journey that involves commitment and efforts from all levels. However, the outcome is very rewarding as the inclusive culture helps the organization to deliver to its commitments, to its people, customers, and shareholders by building enduring relationship based on trust, openness, and creating comfortable environment for everyone to bring their authentic selves and contribute to their full potential. I would really recommend companies to understand employees' needs and expectation to build a relevant DEI strategy and give all employees continuous insight into DEI progress and initiatives to promote organizational inclusion.
Thank you so much, Carl, for this. And I have to say, I'm more than inspired to listen to both of you, both what made you committed to join the WEPs, but also what you think, or rather what I think would most probably resonate with other companies at looking at the women's empowerment principles. Now, when you initially joined the WEPs and used the WEPs gender analysis tool, sometimes when we do these exercises, we see things that we expected, and we see other things that we didn't expect, things that make us proud, and things that make us want to work harder towards a specific objective. So my question to both you, Carl and Lamis, when you used the gender gap analysis tool, what were some of the immediate issues that you identified your company had to address? And what were some of the issues that you wanted to tackle more in the long term? And also with regard to this, I'm wondering if your company has set targets to specific targets that can be monitored to advance gender equality. So the question is more about issues that you wanted to address immediately and the issues that you wanted and wished for to advance and address on long term. And then of course, when addressing these specific issues, if your company have set very distinct and specific targets that can also be monitored. Let's start with Carl this time. Carl, over to you.
Yes, Amis. Well, in the case of Lebanon, our gender gap analysis results back in September 2020 revealed a high percentage of leadership commitment, yet identifying the need to address opportunities in the workplace, but also, and most importantly, in the marketplace and community. Thus, we formed internally a WEP team comprising of our HR, operations, products, and procurement teams, where each member put forth their technical expertise to develop our quick wins and the long-term action plans, adding value to the areas where we intended to work and focus upon. Regarding targets, I believe setting a strategy with a clear roadmap to reach the gender equality targets are key to progress in this area. Leadership commitment and guidance are essential to move the needle forward, but if you want to be successful, we need to move from commitment into action. Reporting diversity metrics guarantees available information to all employees in DEI. Actually, we have recently launched specific websites on DEI where all can monitor this. Diversity sponsorship programs and learning platforms are some examples of our specific actions. We are conscious of the importance of inclusive leadership to effectively create an inclusive culture. That is why, as part of the DEI education, leaders are trained in inclusive behaviors and inclusive leadership and have access to a variety of tools which allow them to increase self-awareness and to set specific actions to grow as inclusive leaders.
Great, thank you so much, Carl. And I was particularly appealed by the reporting diversity matrix that, if I understand from you, anyone in your company can actually access and monitor progress in real time, right?
Correct, correct.
That's quite impressive. Thank you, Carl. Lamis, over to you.
Yeah, I'm really going to build on what Carl said, because I think there's some very similar messages there. And really the key message for us was to strengthen the measures that were already in place to ensure pay fairness, and that processes and policies were reviewed regularly, and that they made sense and that they were relevant, and so on. There were two things that I think we had to look at, whether it was pay gender equity and the gender pay gap, understand really what we're looking at and what the rationale behind different things are. But of course, every company needs to understand their do's and don'ts, and develop those gender smart practices and develop those gender smart processes, whether it's around recruitment, promotion, reward, mobility, working arrangements, and I think, I know we're going to come on to the COVID situation, but that accelerated so much discussion and debate, I think, around what all of this means and making sense of it. But the training is fundamental. I think, having that inclusive leadership training, I see a lot of companies doing that. Deloitte takes it very seriously, and it's mandatory for our leadership to attend that on quite a frequent basis. But what I think really does matter, and you have to have those tangible, measurable goals. It's not that you stare at it and wait for it to change, because that's not how it's going to be. But as you said, Con, as we've said before, the commitments that we make have to be followed up by action. The training is one thing, but just really embedding in your culture those behaviors around respect, inclusion, and what we recently launched is allyship. And I think that that's a really important tool as well, because that, of course, it benefits it can be gender oriented, but it's also a benefit to anyone who feels they are underrepresented and kind of needs that allyship. So the beneficiaries of something like allyship can be vast, but obviously it does very much, there is a focus also on the gender oriented allyship. So I think, what is important is to continue looking at those processes and those policies and those targets, and holding ourselves accountable as a leadership team, and so on. And I think that's really key. So those measures and kind of doing those regular assessments and checking in, I think, is critical. But those action points and the accountability, having the tangible targets, are what's key. And developing those actions into something where people feel it on the ground.
Lamis, it's interesting because you actually touched upon the area of gender pay gap in particular. It seems to be something that you are particularly looking into. Did I understand you correctly?
Yeah, I think you have to. I think everyone has to. I think they have to understand the difference between the gender pay equity and the gender pay gap. And I think, we look at gender pay equity, which is equal pay for work, kind of equal or comparable. And I think on that front, hope a lot of companies take that responsibility very seriously. But when we look at the gender pay gap, that's something that we have to look at around average pay, because it's definitely skewed by more male colleagues at the leadership level. The only way to really try and balance that out is to build more representation at the leadership level of, female leaders. That is a regular exercise, yeah.
Very interesting, Lamis. And if we had more time, I would have loved to actually dig deeper with you into this particular issue, because I know that this is an area that a number of web signatories are looking into in specific, and not totally uncorrelated to your to this subject is, of course, the subject of women's employment and leadership. So while the Middle East has low rates of women's employment and leadership, 41% of the companies who have taken the web's gender cap tool in the region do have an organization-wide gender equality strategy. Now, my question to both of you is, how did the web's platform help identify a plan for these strategies in your companies, particularly to advance women's position in the workplace, marketplace, but also the community overall? Maybe we could start with Lamis this time.
I just want to understand your question properly. So if you don't mind to repeat it. So we're looking at kind of really what caused those strategies to be developed from outside the region, you mean?
Exactly.
Okay. Look, I think, you know, the people that really champion policies for underrepresented groups are underrepresented groups. You know, I think that's kind of fundamentally the patterns that we see. And I think the world kind of, I think the dial changed around what the expectations are and the voice of the underrepresented groups. And I think there are a lot of movements around that happened, and we had to, you know, listen. And I think the West absolutely had to do that. So there was a call for it. I think there was just, you know, a global call for change, which I think was absolutely warranted. And it doesn't mean that people are not already doing it, but it meant that we had to normalize it. Not we as Deloitte, but kind of we globally, we really had to normalize a lot of those changes that need to happen. And like I said, and you mentioned it before, we started to really understand tangibly what the economic impact is of not having that diversity. You know, I think you talked about it, Susan, around the profitability of the company. If they don't have the diversity at the leadership level, you know, you really have to, you have to have that business sense, but also that moral imperative to say what are we trying to achieve and how do we get that representation and that gender equality across the board, and you have to drive policy to support that. I hope I answered your question, but please feel free to elaborate.
Absolutely.
Good.
Yes, you did. And Carl, what about you then?
Yeah, I mean, I will answer on the plans we did and also the areas of improvement that we took since the WEP. So, I mean, on gender equity and women empowerment, as I said, is an essential part of our culture. This shows really in the parity between male and female employees in our team in Lebanon, where we have 57% female representation in the workplace. We treat, respect, and support all women and men fairly, ensure their health, safety, and well-being, as well as promote learning, education, and professional development for women in the organization. The WEP tool gave us a global overview of where we stand vis-a-vis UN gender equality. It allowed us to work our gender equality objective in a more structured way. First, regarding leadership, workplace, and marketplace, and community. And secondly, looking at how we can progress on commitment, implementation, measurement, and transparency. In terms of supporting female talent to advance in leadership, we have already made a significant improvement of 9% representation of women in leadership versus 2020. As I noted, at this moment, 57% of our task force of females are females, among which 43% hold managerial positions. Some of the main improvements we have made to advance women in the organization and in leaderships are, I would name a few of them. One, we have a talent sponsorship program to accelerate the development of women. Second, we have dedicated a senior DEI resource for EMEA and setting up an EMEA DEI Council, which monitors diversity metrics and sets strategic actions. Another area we looked at is in October 2020, we launched in Lebanon the Lean-In Circle. It was a one-year program enrolling 40 talented female employees in a journey of full empowerment and spiritual well-being. It was a safe ground where everyone expressed their inner thoughts, exchanged advice, and received support and guidance by a professional coach. Some of the areas covered were finding inner strength, dealing with emotion, facing fears and obstacles, regaining power, and effective communication. Fourth, effective January 2021, we extended our maternity leave from 10 weeks to 14 weeks, total 98 days, which aligned with the key players in the market and empowering our female employees. Fifth, we endorsed a female wellness plan to our group employee medical policy, allowing a comprehensive checkup for all female-related illnesses. And last but not least, acting upon a strong and deepest belief in giving back to our community and in extending a helpful hand to women working in rural areas during these unprecedented days in Lebanon, we partnered with a non-profit organization to offer our employees a traditional homemade food mune parcel as year-end gift, hence promoting our local products and encouraging women in small businesses.
May I add to what Carl said, Susan, is that okay? May I add to that? It is great to hear. I think there's some really great things coming out of, Deloitte and MetLife and so on. And I think there is definitely the dial is moving in the right direction around female leadership representation. I think that's a very positive move. Deloitte recently released their 7th edition of the Women in the Boardroom report, and although that dial is moving in the right direction, the pace of change is still quite slow. And I think that focus on well-being, trust in the leadership team, giving them pathways within their career progression, giving them choices and options and platforms to develop are all very, very important. But I think we also need to understand why that pace is slow, why that pace of change is slow. So there's some great things happening, and I think what's really important is to keep strengthening those efforts that are being made. There's some really positive action coming out from companies like Deloitte and MetLife, and I think it's really important to, and forums like this I think are a great platform to do that. But that is something that we really have to seek to address, which is that pace of change. There is still not the right representation in this region of female leaders in the public sector.
Lamis, can I ask you a question? Why do you think the pace is this low? Why is it not accelerated? Because many of our partners, both from the private sector, but also the public sector, have pointed at specific actions and roadmaps and commitments, but come back to, as a red thread, that the pace is relatively slow. From your perspective, why is that? Why is it that slow?
I think you need a whole new panel discussion to talk about that. I cannot answer that totally. I think I can give a view, and there are a number of elements that influence the pace of change. I think there are different roles that females have to take at certain points in their life. And I think with that comes a shift in priorities, responsibilities, the burdens that they have to face. And I think traditionally there was a one route to career progression. And I think that one route didn't always work for everyone, So I think the traditional way of progressing in a company really has to evolve and is evolving. And like you said, there are a lot of companies doing some really great things, but there is still room to continue evolving and creating different career pathways and different options for women within a company, for them to feel that they have choices, and creating those choices and meaning them with intention, and so on. The world now, for example, we're talking about flexible working. We have a program called Hybrid Works around how we work, and that was always a big topic for women and their progression as they move towards, different life changes and more senior grades. And that does allow working from home, but it doesn't necessarily allow flexibility. And I think we need to understand what those two things are as well, because working from home or flexibility, they achieve different things. And as we see progress and as we see the world change, those are no longer perks. They used to be perks that we used to be able to position, which is, oh, you can work from home one day. They're not perks anymore, they're expectations, and that's part of doing business. So I think there are a number of policies that are evolving to support women in their career journeys. Like I said, there's a number of platforms and programs that, Deloitte are developing, obviously MetLife also, to really listen to our people as well. We have to hear what they have to say and drive them to be part of the solution. We cannot expect the leadership team to have all the answers and speak on behalf of all the women in our business. So we have to give them a voice and give them a platform to be part of the solution and drive that change.
Couldn't agree with you more. And you alluded to working from home. And of course, this is an area that we've all been looking into and experimenting with, particularly in the past 2 years, of course, because of COVID-19. And we all know, of course, that COVID as a pandemic hit everyone, women, men, boys and girls, and quite distinctively on certain subgroups and in certain areas with those subgroups. So I'm thinking particularly in the area of employment and women. We know that this situation has hit women unproportionately in our own region, for example. We know that 40% of job losses were amongst women. It doesn't sound like majority, it sounds less than 50, but actually it is quite severe if you start off with the fact that on average, only 20% of women in the region are workers. So here is the unproportionality of it. So my question to both of you then is, if you look at both of your companies respectively, crises such as COVID-19 and the distinct effects on women, how do you think that the private sector can help offset global crises' disproportionate impact on women? It's a very, I know it's a very difficult question, but still, let's give it a try. What about you, Carl?
As you both said, women have made important gains in representation, but the pandemic continues to have a serious negative effect on women. So to drive change, companies need to invest even more deeply in DEI. And I can give you some example how. I mean, first, companies need to address diversity as they would address any business priority. So senior leaders need to fully and publicly support DEI efforts. And when leaders actively participate in programs and events to advance DEI, they really signal the importance of this work. So that really makes a difference. Second, taking actions to ensure that women are well represented. So companies should ensure they are applying the same best practices with the same level of rigor across both hiring and performance reviews. I mean, that's, again, very critical area to focus on. Third, companies also need to create a culture in which women and all employees feel comfortable bringing their unique ideas, perspective, and experiences to the workplace. And last but not least, women's day-to-day experiences are primarily shaped by their interactions with their direct managers and colleagues, which means companies need to equip employees at all levels to be part of the solution. Employees need to understand the barriers faced by women and the benefits of a more inclusive culture. This is the only way this will work and we will reach our goals.
Thank you, Carl. Very inspiring words. Lamis, over to you.
I think the COVID situation was like a time machine. I think it took us back to where we had very traditional gender roles, but it also took us fast forward to what the future of work looks like. And we were not ready for either. So I think it kind of put us in a situation where we really had to be intuitive and think about, and really think about how to continue in careers, how to, I think a lot of women had suddenly, as we were saying, multiple roles and had to wear multiple hats. Whether, as you were saying, Paul, you had 4 kids at home. I didn't, I had 2, but you suddenly have to be a teacher, and the priorities and the predictability of your work schedule and the school schedule and so on just completely changed. And with that came a lot of challenge for a lot of people, and I think they were naturally driven to think about where their priorities are and how they make those decisions to focus on one or the other, and I have a dear colleague who once said, women can have it all, but just not at the same time. And I do wonder if that's true. So I think, with that in mind, it probably does set the scene for what can they have at a set period of time. But, I think companies responded very quickly. And I think, unfortunately, companies did lose a lot of great talent as a result of the situation. I think there was just compromise, and everyone faced that compromise. Everyone had to deal with that compromise and respond to it. So there was some unpredictability and some compromise that we had to accept. But that response, the response to the situation, I think was key. And, building that task force together, thinking about how we can really support our women to continue thriving in the business, given the burdens that they suddenly were faced with. Given that this is a part of the world, where in some of the locations that we had, women were away from their support networks and away from their families. So it did, give many families a lot of challenges. But like I said, that response, I think, was key. I think policies were reviewed. I think processes were changed. Expectations had to be reevaluated. open dialogue was not a choice. We had to have that open dialogue with people. As you said, Carl, they have to be part of that solution and part of how we're going to take this forward and sustain our business operations, but really care about our people. And that is absolutely the priority, is the well-being and the welfare of our people. But I think it just did come with a lot of compromise in a very, it was unprecedented times. And so we had to look at, what those compromises were. But with that, I think, we've responded very well. I think a lot of companies in this region have responded very well and really understood through dialogue and through the platforms that we've created and the training and the workshops and so on, how important it is to prioritize the well-being of the workforce and the culture and the environment in which they operate, even if it's remote, even if it is a virtual environment. What does that look like, and what is the responsibility of the leadership team? And how do we still have kind of accountability around behaviors and career management and people management? And I think that was a key part of the response to the situation. But it definitely did have, an effect on the female population in many businesses.
It's really again, it's very inspiring listening to both of you, because I can honestly hear the commitment coming out quite strongly. And I do believe that it wasn't for your personal commitments as well. I'm sure there is commitment organization-wise in your respective company, but it's very easy to see that correlation between also commitment on a personal level, particularly in managerial positions, and that sort of aspirations that then are spread and trickled down throughout an organization. So I can't thank you enough for this really dynamic discussion. I want to see if I've covered most of the essential elements, because there's many important things that were said in this discussion. I just want to start with the fact that both of you seem to have seen the WEPs as a good tool to, first of all, look where you stand internationally. It's a bit of a comparative analysis. Where are we? Where's the rest of the world? So in a way, it hits a competitive nerve and an aspirational nerve. So you see where you are, and even if you're faring relatively well, that in itself can be a push factor to accelerate further. And of course, if you see that you're beyond, or within the groups on the bottom line, that's in itself push factor upwards. But it's a tool to, first of all, see where am I in the international landscape of, in this case, private companies. And then based on that, the analysis that both of you had alluded to, the in-depth analysis or the diagnosis in respective company. And it seems to me like there's a couple of issues that come out with whoever we speak to, not only the two of you, but also with other companies. As one of them is pay gap, and second, of course, women in leadership positions. I think, Carl, you were alluding to that you have a relatively sound formula or proportion in the overall workforce, but it's in the leadership position where it hits, where you see an unproportionally low percentages of women. And Lamis, you alluded to the very same thing, and you actually even connected it to the pay gap issue. So having that diagnosis, identifying the issues, and then identifying, both of you came back to very concrete interventions. You spoke of talent sponsorship programs, you spoke of leadership trainings, and you spoke of increasing, of course, the parental leave. So these are very distinct actions that we also know by evidence do lead to significant and measurable impact. And more importantly, the reporting, right? So, and we have this very good example of a very open and transparent reporting exercise. I think we called it the reporting diversity matrix, where all employees could actually access. But also, that's what you came back to, Lamis, a couple of times, if I heard you correctly, accountability. So transparency is also very well connected to accountability, and you can improve accountability by, of course, improving transparency within an organization. It's evident that there is progress, and it's evident that there is commitment, but there is this pace issue that both of you alluded to, and you, Lamis, I think came back to quite concretely. So in many ways, we're moving towards the right direction, but it's the pace that we need to probably focus on in the couple of coming years. It's the acceleration of that. And of course, as you know, UN Women as an organization stands ready to support technically, strategically, any private company that is interested to either sign the Women Empowerment Principles or move forward in the actual workflow from a diagnosis, analysis, defining a roadmap, monitoring, etc., etc. I can't thank you enough, again, not only for being with us here today, Lamis and Carl, but with what I started off with, which is what is evident, your own personal commitment to advance gender equality in your respective organization. I'm fully, I'm convinced that if it wasn't for that commitment, you wouldn't have had those advantages and progress that both of you could so concretely and tangibly speak of in this session. So thank you so much for being with us here today.
Pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Suzanne.